There's a moment when a human mind simply can't carry the weight anymore. Not because it's weak, but because reality becomes too heavy to hold together. Cinema loves to show people going crazy. But real mental breakdowns don't look dramatic at first. They look quiet, confusing, slow. A missed night of sleep, an ignored phone call, a thought that won't go away. And then, something breaks. What makes these stories terrifying isn't madness itself, it's how understandable they are. Because under the right pressure, any mind can fracture. In this video, we're exploring 9 of the most realistic mental breakdowns ever portrayed in cinema. Characters who didn't just lose control, they lost their grip on reality. Number 9. The Banshees of Inisherin, 2022. Most cinematic mental breakdowns begin with chaos. This one begins with something much quieter: rejection. Padraig is a gentleman living on a small Irish island, where his closest friendship has defined his daily life. When his lifelong friend suddenly decides he no longer wants to speak to him, the situation feels almost trivial at first. No trauma, no violence, just a simple sentence: "I don't like you anymore."
I just don't like you no more.
But identity is deeply tied to relationships. We organize our lives around routine, familiarity, and connection. When that structure collapses without explanation, the mind struggles to make sense of it. At first, Padraig reacts the way most people would: confusion, denial, attempts to fix things. He assumes there must be a misunderstanding. But as rejection continues, confusion turns into desperation, and desperation slowly becomes something darker. He doesn't suddenly transform. You simply watch a stable emotional structure weaken piece by piece. By the time he crosses a boundary he never imagined crossing, the progression feels disturbingly understandable. What remains isn't shock, it's recognition. Because under enough emotional pressure, an ordinary mind can begin to fracture. Number 8. The Machinist, 2004. Trevor Resnick is an industrial worker suffering from extreme insomnia. He hasn't slept properly in almost a year. At first, the problem seems physical: exhaustion, weight loss, difficulty concentrating. But prolonged sleep deprivation does something far more dangerous than making a person tired. It begins to distort perception itself. The brain relies on sleep to regulate emotion, memory, and reality testing. Without it, boundaries start to blur. Thoughts become intrusive. Patterns appear where none exist. Suspicion grows. Trevor's world slowly reorganizes around confusion. He notices small inconsistencies: a missing coworker, cryptic notes, faces that may or may not belong to real people. Each detail alone feels explainable, but together they create a persistent sense that something is wrong. From Trevor's perspective, his behavior isn't irrational. He's responding to what feels like real evidence. He's trying to understand what's happening around him. That internal logic is what makes the deterioration so convincing. Psychological collapse often begins with an attempt to fix reality, not escape it. As guilt surfaces and perception continues to fracture, the audience realizes that Trevor isn't just losing sleep. He's losing his ability to trust his own mind. Number 7. Take Shelter, 2011. Curtis is a working-class husband and father who begins experiencing disturbing visions of a coming disaster. He starts having dreams about a coming storm. At first, they seem like ordinary nightmares, but the feeling doesn't disappear when he wakes up. Tension follows him into daily life. He begins to act as though something is coming, even when there's no visible sign of danger. There's another layer to his fear. His mother developed paranoid schizophrenia at the same age. So every new sign carries a second fear. Not just that danger is coming, but that his own mind might be changing. He begins preparing, reinforcing the shelter, spending money his family can't afford. From the outside, the behavior looks irrational. From his perspective, it's protection. He isn't trying to escape reality, he's trying to protect his family from it. By the time perception itself becomes uncertain, the line between intuition and illness has already started to collapse, and that ambiguity is terrifying. Number 6. Manchester by the Sea, 2016. Some psychological breakdowns aren't loud, they're silent. Lee Chandler is a man forced to return to his hometown after a family tragedy. He moves through life with almost no visible emotion. Conversations are short, reactions are muted, even moments that would normally provoke anger or sadness barely register on the surface. But the absence of emotion isn't stability. It feels like numbness that never fully lifted. After a devastating personal tragedy, Lee's mind seems to have done something many trauma survivors experience. It shut down anything that might trigger the pain again. He avoids connection, avoids memory, avoids himself. From the outside, his behavior can look cold or detached. Internally, it feels more like paralysis. When fragments of the past begin to resurface, the emotional pressure becomes almost unbearable. Not explosive, but crushing. He isn't losing control. He's losing the ability to live with what already happened. And that kind of psychological collapse can be quieter, but far more permanent. Number 5. Whiplash, 2014. Andrew is a young jazz drummer studying at an elite music conservatory. He doesn't start out unstable. He starts out ambitious. At first, his goal seems simple: become great. But the environment he enters turns ambition into obsession. Practice stops being improvement and becomes compulsion. Rest feels like failure. Pain becomes something to ignore. Under constant psychological pressure, his world begins to narrow. Relationships fade into the background. Physical limits stop mattering. Only performance remains. From the outside, the behavior looks like dedication. Internally, it's closer to desperation. Andrew isn't chasing music anymore. He's chasing validation, proof that the suffering means something. As expectations rise and humiliation becomes routine, the emotional strain starts to crack his sense of identity. Mistakes feel catastrophic. Approval feels like survival. By the time he reaches his breaking point, the collapse isn't surprising. It feels inevitable, because when self-worth becomes dependent on perfection, the mind has nowhere safe to stand. Number 4. Hereditary, 2018. Annie is a mother whose family is struck by a devastating tragedy. She is already carrying grief before the real collapse even begins. Loss is part of her life long before the catastrophic event that fractures her family. When that second trauma arrives, the emotional impact isn't isolated. It lands on top of everything she was already holding, and the weight becomes too much. Her reactions don't feel exaggerated. They feel raw. Anger appears without warning. Control slips in moments she can't predict. Conversations turn volatile, then collapse into silence. Inside the family, tension grows with nowhere to go. Guilt, blame, and resentment circulate between people who are all hurting in different ways. Sleep becomes difficult. Stability becomes fragile. Annie isn't simply mourning. She's trying to survive an emotional reality that feels impossible to process. As pressure builds, her perception of events begins to destabilize. Fear mixes with memory. Imagination mixes with belief. The boundary between internal and external experience becomes harder to hold. By the time her behavior crosses into something that looks like madness, the psychological path there already feels complete. It doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from grief, guilt, and pressure that never stop building. Number 3. Black Swan, 2010. Nina is a professional ballet dancer preparing for the most demanding role of her career. Her world is built on control, discipline, precision, obedience. For years, stability has depended on doing everything correctly. Every movement, every decision, every expectation. But the role she's given demands something different. Perfection isn't enough anymore. She's expected to access emotions she has spent for a long time suppressing. That contradiction creates pressure. As expectations rise, the boundary between performance and identity begins to weaken. Physical sensations intensify. Doubt becomes intrusive. Mirrors stop feeling reliable. Even her own body starts to feel unfamiliar. Stress alone doesn't explain what happens to Nina. It's the collision between perfectionism, identity, and repression. The part of herself she was taught to control begins pushing back. Rest becomes harder. Paranoia grows. Small uncertainties expand into overwhelming conviction. From the outside, her behavior looks like instability. From the inside, it feels like transformation. By the time reality itself begins to fracture, the progression feels disturbingly continuous. Not a sudden break, but the endpoint of pressure that has been building for years. And that's why her collapse feels so real. It grows out of control that was pushed too far. Number 2, Taxi Driver, 1976. Travis Bickle drives a taxi through the city every night, unable to sleep and unable to connect. He lives surrounded by people, but almost completely disconnected from them. Nights blur together. Sleep is irregular. Conversations feel artificial. The city around him starts to look less like a place and more like a problem that needs to be solved. Isolation changes perception. Without stable relationships to ground him, Travis's thoughts begin to loop inward. Small frustrations grow into moral judgments. Disgust turns into obsession. His sense of purpose narrows until it centers on a single idea, cleansing the chaos he believes he sees everywhere. From the outside, his behavior appears increasingly extreme. From his perspective, it feels logical. He isn't experiencing himself as unstable. He experiences himself as finally seeing things clearly. That shift is psychologically dangerous. Because once a person begins to see violence as meaning, restraint becomes harder to maintain. By the time Travis reaches his breaking point, the escalation feels disturbingly coherent. Step by step, decision by decision, not random, directed. And that's why the collapse feels real. It grows out of loneliness that was left unaddressed for too long. Number 1, Joker, 2019. Arthur Fleck is a struggling comedian living with severe isolation and mental health challenges. He doesn't begin as violent, he begins as fragile. His life is built on instability, financial pressure, social rejection, medical issues, and a constant sense of being invisible. Small humiliations accumulate, opportunities collapse, support systems disappear one by one. Over time, isolation stops feeling temporary and starts feeling permanent. That shift changes how a person interprets the world. Negative experiences stop looking like coincidence. They start to feel intentional, personal, directed. Arthur's laughter, which once seemed like a symptom he was trying to manage, becomes something else, a signal that emotional regulation is slipping out of reach. As rejection continues and identity weakens, anger begins filling the space where hope used to exist. He isn't suddenly becoming someone new. He's losing the structure that kept him stable. By the time violence appears, the psychological path there already feels complete, built through neglect, humiliation, loneliness, and disconnection. And that progression feels disturbingly plausible, because when a person believes they have nothing left to lose, the mind can reorganize around chaos. None of these characters believed they were losing control. Most of them thought they were solving a problem, protecting something, surviving something. And that may be the most uncomfortable truth behind all of this. The human mind is far more fragile than we like to believe. Under the right conditions, stability isn't guaranteed, it's temporary. And sometimes, all it takes is a little more pressure than a person can hold. Thank you for watching.